Kamehameha the Great, the man who united Hawaii. What if the most feared man in Hawaiian history was once a child marked for death the moment he was born? Imagine a prophecy so powerful that even kings trembled at the sight of it, and a destiny that would turn an outcast boy into the one who conquered every island of Hawaii. This is the story of Kamehameha the Great, the warrior who transformed prophecy into reality. The year was 1758. High above the islands, a blazing comet streaked across the night sky, filling chiefs and priests with dread. To the Hawaiians, this wasn't just a celestial event. It was a sign, the birth of a child who would one day slay rulers and claim the entire chain of islands as his own. That very same year, a baby was born to a noble family. His name? Paiʻea, though history would remember him differently. When King Alapi heard of this child, fear consumed him. If the prophecy was true, his throne was in danger. Determined to stop destiny, he ordered the infant's execution. But fate had other plans. Loyal relatives whisked the baby into hiding, carrying him into the mountains where he was raised in secrecy. While other children played under the sun, this boy grew up isolated, shaped by solitude. When he finally returned years later, the people gave him a new name, Kamehameha, the Lonely One. Yet isolation forged resilience. The child who was supposed to die would grow stronger, taller, and more dangerous than anyone had ever imagined. And soon, his very existence would shake the balance of power across Hawaii. Raised under his uncle Kalani Gpu, the ruler of Hawaii Island, Kamehameha was no ordinary boy. He absorbed every lesson in the brutal Hawaiian martial arts, mastering the use of spears, clubs, and shark-toothed daggers. He learned how to fight in close combat, how to break bones, and how to lead men with authority. But it wasn't just skill. Kamehameha possessed sheer, terrifying strength. As a teenager, he performed a feat that became legendary. He lifted the massive Naha Stone, a sacred boulder said to weigh more than 7,000 pounds. Only the chosen one could move it, and in doing so, Kamehameha proved he carried supernatural mana, the divine energy of the gods. Rumors spread like wildfire. Chiefs whispered that the prophecy was true. The child who had been hunted was destined to unite the islands. Some respected him, others feared him. But all knew one thing: Kamehameha was no ordinary warrior. Still, his loyalty remained with his uncle, serving faithfully in his court. For now, he was the dutiful nephew. But the tides of history were about to change forever. Strange ships appeared on the horizon, ships unlike anything the islanders had ever seen. It was November 1778. Across the islands, Hawaiians celebrated Makahiki, the festival of Lono, the god of peace and prosperity. Suddenly, a massive ship approached, carrying tall foreigners with pale skin, clothed in strange fabrics, flying sails that looked like giant white banners. To the Hawaiians, this wasn't chance. This was the return of Lono himself. The foreigners were led by Captain James Cook, the British explorer. When he stepped ashore, the people fell to their knees, worshipping him as a god. For a time, the relationship was peaceful. Cook and his men were treated with gifts, feasts, and honors worthy of a deity. But gods aren't supposed to return twice. When Cook came back after leaving, suspicion spread quickly. Why had Lono returned after his season had ended? The islanders began to question, were these strangers really divine? Or were they deceivers? Tensions exploded. Theft, violence, and betrayal on both sides escalated into a brutal clash. On Valentine's Day 1779, Captain Cook was killed on the shores of Kealakekua Bay, his body torn apart by enraged warriors. But for Kamehameha, one lesson burned into his mind that day. These foreigners carried weapons that could change everything. Muskets and cannons turned even a handful of men into a deadly force. If an army armed with such power ever returned, Hawaii could not survive divided. And in that moment, Kamehameha knew his destiny was no longer just whispered in prophecies. It had to be fulfilled. The islands must unite, or they would fall. In 1782, King Kalani Gipiu passed away. His death didn't just leave behind grief, it left behind a power struggle that would set the islands ablaze. The king divided his authority in two. His son Kakwalaji inherited the throne, but Kamehameha received something far more dangerous: guardianship of the war god Keke Ilimoku, along with control over one of Hawaii's most fertile valleys. To the Hawaiian people, the god of war wasn't just a symbol. Possessing its idol meant possessing divine right to conquer. Almost immediately, suspicion and jealousy tore the family apart. Kualaji, now king, saw his cousin's growing influence as a threat. When he sacrificed Kamehameha's men to the gods, an act of defiance and insult, bloodshed became inevitable. The two armies clashed near Paiʻea, close to Kealakekua Bay. Spears flew, clubs crushed skulls, and shark-toothed daggers ripped through flesh. The fighting was brutal, intimate, and unrelenting. But amidst the chaos, Kamehameha's chiefs proved their loyalty. One of them struck down Kalaji himself, ripping the royal cloak from his dying body and placing it upon Kamehameha. It was more than victory. It was a declaration. The prophecy was unfolding. Yet even with this triumph, Kamehameha's path to unification was far from over. The island of Hawaii was still divided, and rivals stood ready to challenge his claim. But destiny had more weapons to hand him, and they wouldn't come from the gods. They would come from across the ocean. The death of Captain Cook had not closed Hawaii to the outside world. In fact, it had done the opposite. By the late 1780s, more and more foreign traders began arriving. They came for supplies, sandalwood, and trade. But they also brought with them something far more valuable: guns. One chain of events would forever alter Kamehameha's fate. Two American ships, the Eleonora and the Fair American, arrived in Hawaii. A series of violent misunderstandings left the younger captain, Thomas Metcalf, dead, his crew slaughtered, and his ship seized. Among the survivors were two men who would change Hawaiian history forever: Isaac Davis and John Young. Captured but spared, the two foreigners were impressed by Kamehameha's strength and vision. Over time, they became his loyal advisors. And more importantly, they taught him and his warriors how to use muskets and cannons with devastating precision. For the first time, Hawaiian warriors had not only the courage of their ancestors, but also the firepower of the West. Kamehameha now commanded an army unlike anything the islands had ever seen. This was the turning point. No longer was he just a powerful chief blessed by prophecy. He was a warlord with modern weapons, foreign advisors, and an army ready to carve a kingdom out of the chaos. And he wasted no time proving just how unstoppable that combination could be. The year was 1790, and Kamehameha set his sights on Maui. The ruling chief, Kalanickpule, gathered his warriors at the sacred O Valley. It was a place of beauty, surrounded by towering cliffs and lush greenery. But that beauty would soon be drowned in horror. Kamehameha's army arrived in force, thousands of warriors armed with spears, clubs, and muskets, guided by the steady hand of Davis and Young. And then came the weapon that changed everything, a captured cannon, dragged into battle and positioned against the Maui defenders. When the thunderous shot rang out, the valley shook. The cannonball ripped through the ranks, scattering warriors who had never before witnessed such destruction. Panic spread, but Kamehameha pressed forward with relentless ferocity. The Maui forces fought bravely, but they were overwhelmed. Corpses piled in the river, their bodies damming the waters until the stream slowed, clogged with the dead. From that day forward, the battle was remembered as Kepenuoi, the damming of the waters. For Kamehameha, it was a gruesome but undeniable statement of power. The prophecy wasn't just unfolding. It was being written in blood. But even as he conquered Maui, his home island of Hawaii remained divided. His cousin and rival, Kaiʻea, still controlled vast territories. Their conflict would drag on for years until the gods themselves seemed to take sides in the war. The rivalry with Kaiʻea, his cousin, dragged on like an open wound. For years, Hawaii Island was split between the two chiefs, Kamehameha in the north, Kaiʻea in the south. Battles raged, villages burned, and no side could claim total victory. But then, in 1790, something happened that no warrior could control: the fury of nature itself. Kaiʻea and his army were marching near Kauai, one of the most active volcanoes on Earth, when the mountain erupted without warning. A cloud of choking ash descended upon the warriors, burying entire companies where they stood. Men collapsed, suffocated, and were swallowed by the lava and cinders. When the smoke cleared, hundreds of Kaiʻea's soldiers were dead, a disaster so sudden and terrifying that many believed the gods had spoken. To Kamehameha's supporters, the message was clear: the war god favored him. Years later, Kaiʻea traveled to meet Kamehameha, either to negotiate or surrender. But the moment he stepped ashore, he was ambushed and slain. His sacrifice was offered to Kaka'alimoku, the war god, sealing Kamehameha's control over the entire island of Hawaii. At last, one island had been unified. But prophecy demanded more, and Kamehameha was ready to carve his destiny across the rest of the archipelago. By 1795, Kamehameha had become unstoppable. His fleet was vast, hundreds of canoes and Western-style ships outfitted with cannons. His warriors, drilled with muskets and guided by Davis and Young, were the most disciplined army Hawaii had ever seen. His greatest challenge awaited him on Oahu, defended by Chief Kalaniʻapule. The two forces met at Nu'uanu Valley, a lush green corridor that led into the mountains. At first, Oahu's warriors resisted fiercely, but Kamehameha's strategy and firepower proved devastating. The battle raged up the valley, every step marked with blood. Slowly, Kalaniʻapule's forces were pushed back until they reached the cliffs of Nu'uanu, towering more than 1,000 feet above the sea. There, with nowhere left to flee, chaos consumed the defenders. Some fought desperately, others surrendered, but hundreds were driven over the edge of the cliffs. Their screams echoed down the valley as their bodies fell into the abyss. It was one of the most decisive and brutal victories in Hawaiian history. With Oahu under his control, only 2 islands remained beyond Kamehameha's grasp: Kauai and Nen'ihau. Kauai's ruler, Kamehameha, had seen enough. He knew the fate of those who resisted. And while Kamehameha prepared his armies for invasion, fate intervened once more. An epidemic struck, killing many of his soldiers. Kamehameha seized the moment to negotiate. Rather than fight a hopeless war, he pledged allegiance to Kamehameha, swearing loyalty as a vassal. With that single act, bloodshed was avoided. The prophecy was fulfilled. By 1810, for the first time in history, all the Hawaiian Islands were united under one rule, the rule of Kamehameha the Great. From a child marked for death at birth, to a warrior who lifted the sacred Naha Stone, to a conqueror who drove armies over cliffs, Kamehameha's life was nothing less than legendary. But his legacy didn't end with war. As king, he established laws to protect his people, including the famous law of the splintered paddle, which guaranteed safety for travelers and the weak. He embraced trade with foreigners, but fiercely defended Hawaiian sovereignty, ensuring that his kingdom remained independent during his lifetime. Kamehameha died in 1819, his body hidden in secrecy, just as his life had begun. To this day, no one knows where he rests. But his spirit lingers in Hawaii's identity, remembered not just as a conqueror, but as the man who gave his people unity in a time of chaos. The lonely child had become the greatest king Hawaii would ever know.